Welcome again to tonight's Science Cafe. We are so pleased that you have chosen to spend your Cinco de Mayo with us and have your margaritas here. We are really excited for this penultimate cafe in our series, which is graciously funded by Josh and Judy Weston. And we're so excited to welcome our speakers tonight. I have the great honor of introducing you to two of the museum's best-known and brilliant scientists, paleontologists Mike Novacek and Mark Norell. In case you don't know, Mike Novacek is the museum's curator of fossil mammals, senior vice president, and provost of science. Mike's research focuses on the evolution and history of mammals, and as provost, he oversees over 200 scientists here whose responsibilities include the care and management of one of the world's greatest collections, more than 32 million specimens and artifacts. Mark Norell is chairman and curator in charge of fossil amphibians, reptiles, and birds here at the museum. Mark works on the relationships of small carnivorous dinosaurs to modern birds, naming new dinosaurs and developing new ways of looking at fossils using CT scans and imaging computers. Mark and Mike have been working together in Mongolia's Gobi Desert for over 20 years. Tonight, they'll share some of the highlights of their scientific discoveries, as well as the adventures and misadventures they've faced along the way. Mark and Mike.
Thank you, Bella. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mike.
I'm Mark.
I'm Mike. I'm Mark.
It's been a long time, Mark.
Yeah, it has.
20 years, you know. It's kind of like being married. I mean, we spend many nights out in the desert, and not only in Mongolia, but in places like Mexico and South America, and of course the wild, wild west of Wyoming and Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Got anything else to say about that?
I'm sorry tonight. I'm a little strung out. I came in early this morning from Istanbul, so I'm just sort of still trying to figure it out.
How impressive. Wow, what a world traveler.
I sat in coach.
Well, that's important for these times. Did you fly over Greece? What was going on down there?
I was in the middle aisle.
So it's a pleasure to see you all. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your interest in what we do. You know, the museum is a place of many kinds of sciences, and I had the honor and pleasure of being part of that and part of the administration, the administrative side of science that also tries to make a great home for the work that our brilliant scientists do here. And as you see out there in the Rose Center, all that great astrophysics, rocket science we call it, you know, and we have genomics. And then, but we've had since the museum began, we've had the bone diggers. That's what we are, you know, we're the bone diggers. But maybe this evening we can share with you a little bit about the modernism of bone digging, the fact that there is a lot of things that are new in science and new in technology, from Google Earth and remote sensing to CT scans and so forth, that really make this science also very modern and exciting. But the basic theme is, if you want to be a paleontologist and do all this exciting stuff and use all these new technology tools, you have to do something first. You have to find the bones. You have to go walking around on the ground and doing that. And I think that's why, Mark, please interrupt me. Am I going on too long?
I know, but one of the great things about, this museum really was built on the paleontology collections that exist here, and that it's really known for that. I mean, I think if you ask any cab driver in New York, it's one of the great things about working at this museum as opposed to other museums around the country is that everybody say, oh, you work at the Natural History Museum, you work on dinosaurs. I mean, everybody's kids have been there, everybody's been there and stuff. Even so much as that I've gotten letters before in the mail from people all over the world that just says, Dinosaur Museum, New York. And they've gotten here, like no zip code, no street address or anything else. So somehow they've shown up on my desk. So I mean, that's a great thing because I think it really shows kind of the legacy of this place. And I think that, most of the familiar dinosaurs that we all know, like Tyrannosaurus rex, all that kind of stuff, were all found by paleontologists here at this museum. And that they've been sort of icons of this place since it started. And it's really allowed us to do a lot of other new and different kinds of things. And before we talk about the science that we actually do, I mean, one of the great things about being, a dinosaur paleontologist or a paleontologist in general is that probably more so than almost any other field of science, and I know some of the curators will be pissed off about this when I say this, but people come to this with a great deal of background knowledge, is that I'm sure all of you in this room
I'm just looking at the picture.
have heard about like that some theory of why dinosaurs went extinct. Okay, you've probably also heard that maybe that there's dinosaurs were covered with feathers. You've heard all this and all that. So people know more about dinosaurs than they know about a lot of other fields of inquiry that we do here, which makes it really easy and wonderful to talk about.
Why did dinosaurs go extinct? Can any of you tell us? Speak up. Yeah. Meteorites. Anything else? What?
Basalt traps. Yeah.
Basalt traps. You mean volcanoes? What else is there? Well, they evolved into birds, but a lot of dinosaurs did, take it.
No, but all three of those answers that you guys are said are right, because certainly
We
an
don't
asteroid,
know.
an asteroid or a meteorite hit. Certainly not all dinosaurs are extinct, because the dinosaurs are probably more diverse today than they ever were, by any measure that we would actually make. 'Cause there's 10,000 at least species of birds around today, and just like that, humans are a kind of primate. Birds are a kind of dinosaur. So, and there's 10,000 of them now. Also, that dinosaurs were certainly non-bird dinosaurs were certainly decreasing in diversity as we moved toward the time when the meteorite hit. And some of this has been attributed to volcanism, like the Deccan traps, and some of it's been attributed to just a variety of other things, so that it's all over the place.
Constipation was one theory.
This is
Because
hard. I
they
don't know
ate
if
a
you guys
lot of
are,
that.
this is hard. I don't know if you're laughing at us or what's on the screen.
That's not us. I mean, some of these pictures were from Roy Chapman Andrews' expedition. Some of you probably know about that in the 1920s. And Roy, who was a curator here, was one of the reasons we got to go back first in 1990, because when the Soviet Empire collapsed, the legacy that he really established.
I'm going to watch the slides while you're talking.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a great opportunity for us, and we were able to go back to Mongolia within months after it declared its independence from the Soviet Union in 1990, and we've been there ever since. It's an amazing place.
Mike?
Yeah.
In case you do want questions, I'm over here. It's Ellen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I have a microphone so I can just pass it to
Okay,
people
great.
and we
Yeah,
can get their
please,
questions
we'll be
recorded.
happy to answer.
So just raise hands.
If
and
you want
I'll-
to comment on the pictures, like, is that you in that picture? Like, you look a lot younger or something. Yeah.
We have one question right now.
Okay.
From a curator.
Oh, no.
So in the ad that I got today in my inbox, it said that after all, fossils are the only real evidence we have of evolution happening on this planet.
No,
Which-
I didn't. We didn't
I didn't say
that.
you
We
said
didn't write that ad.
We didn't say it like that.
Can you express maybe a little more generally about some of the other evidence we have of evolution, maybe, for example, for those things that don't leave fossils, and then how that actually has recently interacted with the dinosaur fossil world, for example, in terms of paleogenomics?
Go for it, Mike.
Well, what we really said is fossils are the only direct evidence of what actually happened, because they're a historical record, like Pompeii or something. But clearly, based on the study of living organisms, especially their genes and many other things, that's not us. That's Roy. That's Roy Chapman. We call him RCA here. That's a sandstorm coming in, by the way. Mark, we'll answer your question in a little while. This is a 95 expedition. We had National Geographic out there. Oh, well, anyway, so from living organisms, we can tell a lot about what actually happened. from studying their anatomy, from studying their genes, because if we reconstruct the patterns of evolution and the relationship of organisms on the great, what we call the tree of life, we actually have a history like a family genealogy, but it's a family genealogy of dinosaurs and birds and mammals and all kinds of other organisms. And that's an enormously important and exciting quest we now have. And I think the museum is in a huge place of opportunity, because we got all these people, wonderful scientists here. There are several of them here. I see Melanie and Mark, and there's others who are going all over the world collecting new organisms, new species, and new habitats we know nothing about, and also reconstructing these patterns of the history of life through the study of genes, through the study of anatomy, and many other things. So, putting all that stuff together is an enormous task, and it's a huge computational load because it's a lot of complicated information. But we now have the tools in computation and other ways in databases, digital databases. Oh, now I'm really going on too long. At any rate, it's an exciting time to be alive and be a scientist in this area, because it's both finding those fossils on the ground, but also looking at genes and anatomy and living organisms that gives us, perhaps for the first time in our history, a better sense of the patterns of evolution of all life, or of most of it, that we can actually focus on.
I mean, to me, I think that the big thing is just looking at fossils. I mean, imagine if we lived in a world that didn't have any fossils, like that if there was no fossilization that ever happened. So
this is, by the way, that's how Mongolians cook a goat. They singe the hair off with a blowtorch. I'm sorry, that's a little graphic.
So imagine that we had like a world with no fossils. So, I mean, that's the world that Mark Siddall lives in. He works on leeches, okay? But fossils really allow us to be able to investigate some of these genomic problems, because when we can tie specific organisms that we find as fossils within living groups of animals, that we can look at the antiquity, we can actually, of these things. I mean, I think that there's two ways to be able to determine how old things are. One is through looking at biogeography, which can often be very difficult to interpret. I mean, that means if you find a group of animals which is found in Africa and South America, and we know more or less when Africa and South America splits, so that we can then talk about that divergence. But the really deep divergences all really come from the fossil record. And that I think that our feelings about evolution, our understanding of evolution, both on the level that I work on, which is mostly morphological, to the molecular level, would be very, very different if we had no fossils.
Any questions from a non-scientist?
Questions? Just raise your hand. I'll
Just
get the mic
raise your hand
to you.
and Mike will come over.
Okay. Here I come.
But very enlightened people. I'm not,
So, can you share with us your most exciting finds in the field?
Well, I think Mark and I would probably agree that in terms of field work, the most exciting day in our lives, a day in a life, was July 18th, 1993, when we found this place, and some of the pictures are showing it, called Ukatoga. We named Ukatoga, a locality.
We actually didn't name it Ukatoga. We would have picked a better name.
Yeah, we would have picked a better name, but the Mongolians named it that. And we found this place, which it's clearly the richest dinosaur site in the Gobi, or fossil site, and probably in many ways, in many of its dimensions, one of the most informative and richest sites in the world from the age of dinosaurs. And the reason for that is not only did it preserve these dinosaurs in exquisite ways, and you guys saw some of the photos of these dinosaurs on nests, and there were some pictures on the covers of various science journals on that score, and embryos and all kinds of amazing things. But we also had a whole range of other organisms, mammals and lizards and birds, and it really was kind of like a Pompeii of an ecosystem that's 80 million years old. 80 million years old. So that was something. I mean, it was a little weird finding all that stuff. We got out of a car, our Jeeps, and what happened is our gas tanker got stuck in the sand and the night before, and So the drivers, the technicians were going to dig that up, and I said, this place looked not very interesting. We were just going to head west for about 80 or 100 more miles, and we said, well, let's just go up there and look at some of these red rocks. And we drove up to this little spot on a hill, and we saw all these white splotches all over the hills, and we didn't know what that was, but they turned out to be dinosaur skeletons. And we looked down out of the corner of the Jeep, out of the door, and there was a perfect little lizard. We may have a picture of it in here. Just a whole skeleton wrapped up, curled up, right by the right front tire. And within about 2 hours, we knew we had found an amazing thing, just amazing. And I have to say, we've never found anything that good since, at least in the field like that. I mean, Mark's done some amazing work on feathered dinosaurs from China, but that's more of a cooperative effort. But that was great. And within a couple hours, Mark, you found the embryo.
Yeah, but you find this stuff in the field, and there's always this thing, aren't you really excited? Well, usually you're really tired, you're really dirty, and you really don't know how good it is, because is that when we excavate these things, that we don't excavate them that closely in the field, just because is that if we do, we're going to screw it up and break it. So we excavate them not so closely, and then you really find out really how good it is when you get it back here, and our technicians work on it, and it's actually brought out. You go down to the lab every day and get more and more excited as it emerges from the rocks, because I found some things in my life that I thought were going to be the greatest thing ever, and it's turned out to just be a hunk of bone or a hunk of rock. Sometimes not even a fossil. Other times that there's things that I didn't think were so great that we collected, and then they come back here, and then one of our technicians will call us and say, you got to come down to the lab. This is so great. It's so great. And you go down and you see it, and it's wonderful. So it's there is no sort of eureka moment in the field, except for that one. That was pretty good.
That was pretty good. I mean, you guys might have seen a series of images earlier where this clawed dinosaur, you could see the claws. That's the way we found it in the rock. And it was only really, we could see a couple weird things below this specimen that looked like eggs, but it wasn't until we came back to New York that we had discovered the first fantastic skeleton of a nesting dinosaur. And this dinosaur was sitting, on Mark, about 21 eggs?
22 eggs, yeah.
22 eggs, clutched around it just like a bird would. And that was a big deal. I mean, but we didn't really know how good the specimen was until maybe 6 months later.
Well, I think longer than that. It took 6 months to get it back to New York.
Well, that's right. I'm not so good on time. Cautious. But any other questions?
We've got a question down here to the right.
I'm sorry to over here to your right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to cover ground that we already covered. You asked, the first thing you asked was what happened to the dinosaurs, and then you discussed, evolution and volcanoes and things like that. Just so I can go home and talk about it at the bar tonight and everything.
Yeah.
What?
Well, you're in a bar now.
What do you two say happened to the dinosaurs? Where are they? Why isn't there one running around right now?
Well, I think there are ones running right now. There's at least 10,000 of them. We just call them birds now, because birds are more closely related to animals like Tyrannosaurus rex than Tyrannosaurus rex is to almost any other dinosaur you've ever heard of. And I think the work in China has been so wonderful doing it that, Tyrannosaurus rex had feathers, believe it or not. Tyrannosaurus rex had a wishbone. Tyrannosaurus rex was something which was very bird-like. Even I think that now that there's been some, work that's ongoing right now, it's in a very nascent stage, but really shows that, at least feathers or feather-like structures are primitive for dinosaurs in general, so that all dinosaurs might have had feather-like structures. So that it's like saying, well, the extinction of, say that we obliterated the planet today, and the only thing left was, that us and chimps. Would we say that mammals are extinct? We wouldn't, because there's still representatives of us and chimps. And we're mammals in the same way that birds are dinosaurs. They are a kind of dinosaur.
So it was a major event that killed off the big ones, and then the rest followed.
Big and small.
Big and small. I mean, it's not just the big ones. I mean, that the supposition that all dinosaurs are these huge gargantuan animals like you see in the rotunda when you go upstairs is not true. I mean, largely that has to do with both how fossils were collected early on, because most of the animals that were collected to be as big animals so people could put them on display in museum exhibits. Also, that it's just the physics of the way in which the dinosaurs are preserved. I mean, if you go out to anywhere today and there's like a dead elephant, there's a dead cat, and there's a dead hummingbird, that you come back a month later, you're probably only going to see parts of the cat and less of the cat than you would see the elephant, because the small bones preserve much more delicately than larger ones. But if you actually go back to these sites and you look for things like teeth and everything else, dinosaurs were as disparate in size as mammals are, so that there's lots of small or non-avian dinosaurs, non-bird dinosaurs, were as disparate in size as all of them. And as far as what killed the non-avian dinosaurs, it's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult question because there's really only a couple places in the world which we can measure this, and you can't really do the kind of inferential statistics that one would like on the data that exists. So that, and you can't just say that, oh, well, we know an asteroid hit or a meteorite hit 65.2 million years ago, and it caused all this, because it did hit. We know it hit, but some animals go straight through the boundary like nothing happened.
Turtles went galloping right on through.
Well, birds. What if you look at two things which are considered to be the canaries in the coal mine for environmental disaster? It's like frogs and salamanders, which are that rain pH changes by like a fraction of one, and they go extinct, or they start dying off like crazy in Europe. They go straight through the boundary like nothing happened. So it's a very, very difficult question in the terrestrial realm.
So it's a mystery.
I've got a question over here. This side.
Oh my gosh.
Hi. So before we had all this technology, how did
Gourmet
you know?
restaurant. Sorry.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. So before all the technology that we have today, how did you know where exactly to dig?
Well, we never really know where to dig. I mean, it's just that it's like that you pretty much do it now like we did in the old days, except we're sort of supplemented by having better maps, better satellite imagery. But it's basically the same. You try to get to some place, you stand up on top of the cars with your binoculars, and you say, well, that would be a good place to go look. And you would never start digging for a vertebrate fossil of any kind until you find things on the surface. Because if you just started digging, you would never find anything.
Right.
Because
The rocks have a certain signature, in the Gobi. They might be a nice red color. There's a sandstone. They're not too chunked up with big stones inside of them like conglomerates and these other coarse rocks. And you say, well, that might be a good place to look. But one of the heartbreakers is Mark and I and our teams have been in many places where we go, wow, that looks so perfect, and drove there for half a day and not found one piece of bone. In fact, the Ukatogad, which was so rich, didn't look good at all. We just stopped there because the truck got stuck. So the serendipity is a little bit scary in that way. But you have to walk around and, as Mark said, look for these bones on the surface. You can't dig down for them.
We've got a question down here over to your right.
Two questions because I'll never
Hi,
get the
Josh.
mic back.
Pardon?
Two questions because I won't get the mic back.
Oh, okay. Very smart,
Question
Josh.
number one, there probably were billions and billions of dinosaur-like things over there, millions of years. And even though everything on Earth is not dry and high, how come with all of those dead dinosaurs, you can't find more bones than just this occasional rare find, and then totally different from that? Could you comment on what one can do with DNA today recovered from these ancient things, and how far can you push that, trying to make the DNA become something as distinct from just a source for analysis?
That's great. Josh, we'll do a tandem answer on that, but I'll start by saying one of the reasons it's so hard to find dinosaurs and fossils in so many places in the world is that the Earth is, and it's interesting, but the Earth is very dynamic and it changes. Mountains rise, cut through rock, erosion wipes out a lot of sediment. A huge swath of the planet we know very little about the history of because it's in the tropics. And tropical soils, laterites are always, trees are rotting and laterites are formed and soils are eroding. So you got to get into these kind of hot, dry, inert places. The Colorado Plateau, Argentina, the Gobi, where you get the kind of sort of stately uplift and erosion that reveals the rocks, that increases the chances of finding fossils. Also, erosion is very important in dissecting these cliffs because, you get a lot of surface area when you walk. You can walk what seems to be a 2 or 3 miles straight arrow, but you might have walked 20 miles because of all the dissections of the canyons. That reveals a lot of surface area for bone. But why is the Gobi so good compared to a lot of even these desert areas? We don't quite know, but it is. There's even some, variance there that we can't explain. So that's part of the problem. The Earth is just completely rebuilding itself all the time, and it's destroying fossils in the process. It makes it a lot harder. As far as DNA, it's very hard to extract DNA from fossils, and it's even harder, if not impossible, to do anything with that other than to say what they are. But Mark can really, Mark can extend on that kind of argument.
Well, I think that we can't. There is DNA in some fossils. We know that we're able to actually, to find it, but it's just sheared into very small pieces, and it's impossible to put back together in any sort of cogent kind of way. We don't know how many chromosomes these animals had. We don't know the gene order in any of these animals, and even if we had the entire molecular sequence of all, we had a whole genome for a non-avian dinosaur. We have whole genomes now for lots of living animals that exist, but you could not take that whole genome and use that to be able to create life independently just from that. The process is just much too hard of putting that into a working cell and having all the other catalytic activity that needs to go into the development of things. So we just, at least now with our current theory of molecular biology of development and things, we just could not be able to do that. That's just outside the scope of things. So we're not going to have, no matter what some of my colleagues have said about turning on genes and stuff like that, within
maybe Mark over there would claim that,
not my colleagues here, the general paleontological colleagues of saying that, oh yeah, we're going to be able to reverse engineer dromaeosaurs and things like that from chickens. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
Exactly.
We have a question here on the opposite side.
Which side? I can't see anything.
Oh, over here.
Okay, wave your arm. The other side. Okay.
So you found this dinosaur with the clutch of 22 eggs. What would kill it and the eggs at the same time? The eggs are pretty self-contained and they're sort of safe, but they had to be killed and frozen in time in some way.
Right. Well, what happens at this? The dinosaur or fossil accumulations occur in one of two ways. And one of what are called death assemblages. And that's what you would see like in places today like the Serengeti or the Great Plains of the United States, where an animal dies and it gets scavenged a little bit, and then it gets washed into a
Bones
river or a
scattered.
lake, that kind of thing. So you just find a few bones. At Ukatolgad, we have a case where we have what's called a life assemblage, where these animals were buried alive by sand dunes that liquefied. And the reason that the sand dunes liquefied, if you can think of a place where there was sand dunes that existed with some interdunal areas that were rich in vegetation and that kind of thing, and then the sand has a particular mineralogy to it, that it has a lot of clay. So during ephemeral rainstorms, and we're not talking about one every 2 weeks, that kind of thing. We're talking about the big 500-year rainstorm, that kind of thing, that where the sand dune would become saturated with water and it would catastrophically collapse. And just like when you make a sand dune at the beach and you dump too much water on it, or a sand castle at the beach, you dump too much water on it, the whole thing falls apart immediately. It just collapses catastrophically. Well, these were big runouts that went out and just covered animals and covered them buried alive, in exhibiting behaviors, like even in some cases the classic fighting dinosaur specimen of Mongolia, where one animal was attacking another one that was buried by a sand dune. And
it's really a Pompeii situation. The mammals we found and the lizards look like they're in burrows, sometimes little families in burrows. So they were instantaneously covered. So whatever buried them killed them. It's quite remarkable. The other thing that's really interesting about Ukatolgad as a site and a couple other sites in the Gobi is we find these kinds of rocks, and you've seen them in a lot of slides, those red beds, those red sandstones are very characteristic of these fossil-bearing rocks. But a lot of places, there's nothing in them. There are no bones, no fossils. And we see evidence in Okotogot of perhaps an ancient lake, little layers of rock, shales that suggest an ancient lake. So it suggests that these animals might have been on the move through a fairly arid area, and they congregated to breed and raise their young, and the predators came around to feed on, very much like an oasis in the desert or a savanna situation. And they're caught in the act of living and dying in this, and what a tremendously lucky thing for us to be able to discover.
And one of the other things about just the way these animals are preserved is it's one of the reasons that we only find small things, because occasionally we will find shed teeth and things like that of large carnivorous dinosaurs, like teeth that are about 2.5 inches long, or we'll find the footprints of the big sauropod dinosaurs like you see upstairs.
And their eggs.
But those animals probably would have been large enough to escape these sand flows when it happened. So we don't find their remains, but we know that they were there. And we just tend to find smaller animals. I mean,
That's Mark's birthday, by the way. Yeah. Little party Mongolian still.
Yeah. So the big animals and stuff were big enough to get away probably from these things. And we only find their remains, like their eggs or their shed teeth. But they were there.
We've got a question back here, back pillar.
Hi. Mindful of any outstanding warrants or non-disclosure agreements, what's the weirdest or most unusual non-scientific thing that happened in Mongolia?
The UFO.
The UFO. We saw a UFO. I don't have a picture of it. We sent it to the astrophysics department here, and they said, well, maybe it was a wayward Russian rocket, but they said, wow,
cool.
It's amazing. That's an amazing image.
It was this thing that was like, it was an S shape, okay, that was glowing. Ooh. And it had a ring around it.
There was about no tequila that night.
And it was about maybe 10 times as big as the moon, and it went right over our head, horizon to horizon. And we had enough time that we got a lot of pictures of it.
There was another time, and
that was pretty cool.
We don't have the picture. Yeah. Another time, many years ago, when we had a BBC crew out there, we had a thing that we called. There was a place where we always camped toward the end of the summer, which was called Naran Balak. Naran, it means sunny spring. Naran means sun, and Balak, spring. A lovely place, kind of an oasis out there, and we were kind of decompressing after a long season. We had a BBC Nova crew out with us, and we had what we called there the Battle of Naran Balak, where a couple of...
But that's typical Mongolian.
Yeah, but it was pretty dramatic fight with a couple of technicians fighting over the cook, the female cook, and the BBC crew was pretty traumatized by that.
I thought it was kind of weird too. One night, like we sit up late at night and everything in camp, and I mean the Gobi Desert is a strange place, and especially now Mongolia is going through this spiritual renaissance where all of a sudden there's all the old monasteries in the middle of the Gobi are being reconsecrated and everything, and we're just like sitting there around the fire, and this llama walks by, okay,
yeah.
And he's a dwarf, so he's about 5 feet tall. And nobody is out there. We're in the middle of nowhere. And this guy just walks, 5 feet from us. And he's got his staff with his a stupa maker, so he's making merit with each time he puts it in the ground. And it's the middle of the night, and there's no words which even go between us. He just walks right by.
I thought I was dreaming. I didn't, oh yeah, it's just a monk just walking by. There are no people here for 300. You have to realize, the Gobi Desert is a remarkable place because it takes us 3 days to get to our field sites, and we're only 300 or 400 miles from Ulaanbaatar. There's only 1 or 2 paved roads, and they're not the direct way to the desert. There are no fences. The only fences in the Gobi, this is 500,000 square miles. It's about the size of 5 Colorados. There are no fences in the Gobi Desert except the fences that are around the tourist camps to keep the tourists in. But you can camp anywhere you want, or it's an amazingly empty place. And the people who live there have no sense of the spatial dimensions. Like sometimes we've been lost, even with GPS, and we'll stop at a gur, this is a little tent for the nomads, and we'll ask, well, how do we get over this mountain range? They said, well, just drive to our friends. They're our neighbors. We love them. Just drive over there and ask them, because we don't exactly know. So we drive for a day. Drive for a day and finally see a little white spot that's a 10. That's the way these people perceive distances. It's an amazing, amazing place. I think the spatial sense of it is almost as dramatic as everything else. It's just an incredible thing. So, there are lots of adventures in a situation like that.
Next question.
Yes, you mentioned returning in the early 90s and restarting the work. Was there any work being done by Mongolian scientists or Soviet scientists in the years or decades before?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, after the,
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. And since then, are the Mongolian scientists picking up any more?
Yeah, well, after the Americans were basically thrown out and had to leave because when Mongolia was subsumed into the under Soviet influence in the late 1920s, that after World War, everything stopped. Then after World War II, that there was a big series of Russian expeditions, Soviet expeditions, which went and traveled through these areas. But mostly those were covers for spying missions, to look at the Chinese border, to map the area. Then in the 1960s, there was a great series of very successful and very, very important expeditions, were the Polish-Mongolian expeditions, led by a consortium of Polish and Mongolian scientists who did great things.
We showed some pictures of those guys.
Yeah. I mean, they did some really, really wonderful, wonderful expeditions out there. The Russian expeditions continue even to this day, but they're largely downsized. It's basically one car that kind of drives around the desert and looks for stuff. But the Poles did some tremendous work out there, some really great work out there, and found like a lot of fantastic specimens, both in recollecting a lot of localities that the American Museum had collected back in the day, as well as stretching it further out into the desert and finding some new ones.
I hate to brag, though, they never found something like Ukatogat. And the evidence of this is not that kind of incredible, obscenely voluptuous, insane amount of concentration of skeletons. And the leader of that expedition, actually, I worked with about 10 years ago. She was then in Oslo, Norway, and I brought some of the specimens we had found at the site. She had heard about it, and she went into shock. And then I showed her where it was on the map, and she said, we were within a mile of that locality. I can't believe we didn't run across. We didn't have the luck to run across it. So,
well, we drove by it for 3 years.
Yeah, we drove by it for 3 years. So we don't get any credit either.
We've got another question down here over to the right.
So in the Wild West days of dinosaur hunting, the literal Wild West days, you had the Bone Wars, between Marsh and Cope, and when it comes to Gobi or perhaps Lao Nin, I was just wondering how competitive or cooperative things were, and how the kind of commercial aspects. You have a lot of poor farmers and and other people, sometimes creating hoaxes, sometimes trying to sell fossils however they can. How that's kind of playing out right now.
This is a big problem. Actually, in terms of the scientific side, there are a couple other major expeditions out there. I think the best way to describe it is we've learned how to get along, and with a few exceptions, because we were there so early and we actually accomplished a lot and worked so much with the Mongolian scientists. I think there's been there's been a polite sort of relationship between we have a Japanese expedition. Well, with the Japanese, once we made them, we were at the end of our field season in 1994, and we had run out of liquor entirely. And we knew they were
bad thing. We weren't getting along very well.
We knew that they were camped at a site, a good fossil site, not far from the Flaming Cliffs. So we offered to make them a sushi dinner, and Mark was very he's brilliant at doing this with the canned stuff we had, and they went crazy. And while they were eating the sushi dinner, we drank all their wine, but or a good part of their liquor. But we have a good relationship with these different groups. You asked a question about commercial collecting, though, and that's a serious issue. In fact, Ukha-Togod, we know, has been ransacked by some commercial amateur collectors.
I wouldn't say amateur, I would say
mainly commercial,
professional collectors.
Where specimens are hacked out, no field data. And even though we kept the locality secret, when we published the first paper on that locality in a major scientific journal, it was Nature, we actually got permission from Nature not to publish the precise locality description because we were so worried about commercial ransacking. But eventually people found it for one reason or another, and there clearly shows the damage now. We went there last year, we still found some stuff, but unfortunately it's been really hacked through, and this is a big problem.
In northeastern China, in Liaoning province, where the feathered dinosaurs come from, it's a whole different issue because of all the feathered dinosaurs that have ever been collected, only about 5% have been collected by professional paleontologists. The rest have been collected by farmers. And in Liaoning, I mean, if you're a farmer, it's the poorest province in all of China. That the average salary there, or average, family makes about $350 a year, mostly growing sorghum and that sort of thing in really miserable conditions. And if you find one good fossil, even if you sell it to a gangster middleman and things, you'll get about a really good one. You'll get about $50,000 for. So it's really just like hitting the lottery.
Yeah.
And that's caused a lot of issues. But nevertheless, is that I'm sure that every feathered dinosaur that you have ever seen covered in the press, including the ones I've worked on and stuff, have all been found by farmers and then found their way into Chinese collections, preferably. But at the same time, a number of them are smuggled out of the country and are sold at the major fossil fairs in Munich and in Tokyo, Denver, Tucson, places like that every year for a lot of money. And when I say a lot of money, I'm talking about the mid six-figure level all the way up to seven-figure level and stuff. So that these are very precious
things. These are things. They're like diamonds.
And there is a lot of fakery that occurs in these things. But I would like to say that it's pointed out that all these feathered dinosaurs are fakes. They're not. I mean, not a single one of the faked ones has ever appeared in a scientific journal, even though that some people have tried to make claims about it and written papers about them. None of them have ever survived the review process, so that the fake ones have never made it.
Okay, we're over on the opposite side again.
What's the opposite side?
Hi.
Okay.
What's the weirdest thing you guys have ever eaten and drank at one of these camps?
Ever eaten? Ever eaten? Was that the question?
Yeah, what's the weirdest thing we've ever eaten and drank? Well, drinking, the weirdest thing is actually what the Mongolians drink. It's a thing called Irak. It's fermented mare's milk. I've worked there 20 years. I can't take this stuff. It's alcoholic mare's milk, And to the point that's so much part of their
culture. It's not good non-alcoholic either. So.
Yeah. It's so much part of their culture that they call beer Shah Irak. Shah means yellow, so it's like yellow Iraq. But as far as food, Mark, what do you think? Scorpions?
Well, I mean, the weirdest thing I've eaten, because I've worked much more in China than Mike has, and probably the weirdest thing I've ever eaten in China is in Jilin province and stuff, and it's this stuff called the Three Squeaks, and it's baby live swamp rat babies, and they squeak once when you grab it with a chopstick, once when you put it in the sauce, and once when you bite it.
Mark, that's
what? Well, they asked,
Yeah.
Give them what they want.
We do have, it's really funny because we have a kind of running problem in camp because some of us like vegetables, and stuff. Mongolians love meat and they eat tons of meat, and we also have an interesting situation. We have a number of Argentines in our crew from one year to another on occasional years, and they love meat too. So they've suddenly bonded with the Mongolians, eat meat. And one night after a huge debate, let's have some vegetables, guys, and the Argentines and the Mongolians went crazy. And I turned to one of my Argentine crew members. I said, don't you guys ever eat vegetables? And he said, sure we do, Mike. Chicken. So, you know, this occupies some time, the debate over meals.
We've got another question down over to your right.
Getting back to the geology, hate to do this. Oil, is that a form of dinosaurs or that ancient, prehistoric animals that have decomposed beyond the fossil stage? What exactly is oil? Just massive populations of dinosaurs in a much deeper, more pressured space?
It could be older, it could be younger. A lot of it is marine, marine organisms.
Probably 99% of it, maybe not that, but 75 to 80% is marine.
Yeah, oceanic
organisms.
creatures.
And the rest is plants.
Yeah.
Oil exuded out of
and coal,
forests.
Coal or plants primarily.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and it's just over here.
Where?
In the pit.
Okay.
I was lucky enough to grow up here with the museum and sort of got the whole dinosaur thing from by the time I could walk. But a lot of the country right now thinks evolution isn't actually real. Is there some way you guys could take your act on the road and I mean, this stuff impresses kids, and it might bring them to science, even though their parents are teaching them rubbish.
Yeah.
I mean,
here. Maybe not us, though, But no, it's a huge problem, and the notion is you're absolutely right. If you can give people a sense of discovery, what actually happens that they can't deny, like these things didn't all get wiped out by a flood 5,000 years ago. That brings the lesson home. That brings those issues home. On the other hand, I have to say, and the museum has been involved in this for years, and one of the most exciting moments of my career actually was when we opened the Darwin show here, and the tension we had and the issues we had, and the fact that we made such a strong statement about the importance of evolution. But the point is, there are a lot of people who will never be convinced, or there's a certain underscoring of belief that might be there that you cannot penetrate, and maybe because of people's strong beliefs and their traditions, it's not possible to do that. But the people who aren't sure, who don't have a sense of this, who don't have any bearings, they need to know the message from our side. They need to know what science is. I think a lot of this is just understanding the process of science, what science can say and what it cannot say. And a lot of that was in the Darwin exhibit. What is a scientific theory? A theory doesn't mean it's some weak idea. A theory means that there's a lot of empirical evidence that's been thrown at it, and it still survived. And, people, generally, we have a deficit in science education. That's something the museum is very importantly working on, with bringing our scientists together with these educational programs. And, that's a deficit. A lot of this just has to do with a lack of understanding of what science is and how it's done. But it's the same as the evidence that you track for a legal case or anything else. You have to find you make those observations that are undeniable, that test your ideas. And that's why evolution is such a powerful notion, because it's withstood those tests.
And some of it, too, is we do take it on the road in many ways. I mean, not just us as paleontologists who work on fossils, but most of my colleagues in the other areas of both biology, anthropology, even the geology department here at the museum, regularly go out on the road and give public lectures around the country and around the world about what we do and why science is important, and that the unifying theme behind that is that the Earth has a past and that the Earth is old, and that we can explain some of the diversity, whether it's mammals or animals, whether it's plants, whether it's human cultures, just by the antiquity of the Earth. So that we do that a lot, and we try to do it in many different ways, both by public lectures, both by forums like this, as well as writing projects, internet projects, teaching short courses on the web, and doing all of this. So that's all sort of part of the outreach. I mean, obviously some people are better at it than others. Some people are more interested in it than others. But at the same time, I mean, it is a really common theme in what we do.
Thank you for the question.
I think that was a wonderful note to end on. Mike, Mark, thank you very much.
Our
Thank
pleasure.
You all.
Thank you.